Imagine buying a ticket to a billion-dollar blockbuster finale. You've been following this franchise for years.
Right, years of buildup.
Exactly. And the climax finally arrives on screen. The tension is just unbearable. And then, like, absolute chaos erupts. Beloved foundational characters are brutally decapitated.
Oh, it was wild.
The earth literally opens up and swallows people whole. Audiences in the theater are screaming, crying, throwing popcorn at the screen in pure shock. And then the movie just stops.
Yeah.
The vision fades, and the film reveals that the entire 20-minute massacre you just watched was, well, entirely a fake out. None of it actually happened.
It's really one of the most audacious and frankly kind of manipulative cinematic parlor tricks in modern blockbuster history.
It really is. So today we are looking at a massive stack of sources. We've got YouTube video essays, extensive Reddit threads, entertainment articles from Screen Rant and Slashfell, and these incredibly deep dive fan wikis.
There's so much material to go through.
So much. And they all explain exactly why Hollywood had to resort to that massive manipulative fake out just to fix a foundational narrative problem in the Twilight saga. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are so thrilled you're joining us at the table today.
It's a super fascinating topic because, we usually think of a book-to-movie adaptation as a straight translation. Like, you just take the words, put them on screen, and the core DNA of the story remains intact.
Right, just a one-to-one transfer.
Exactly. But what we're going to unpack today is how the shift from page to screen in a mega franchise completely breaks that translation process. We aren't just talking about, like, cutting a few chapters for time here.
No, definitely not. We're looking at a total recalculation of a story's emotional heartbeat.
Yeah.
And I know you might be sitting there thinking, I already know this story. It's the rainy town of Forks. It's the vampire. It's the glowing skin.
The classics.
Yeah. But I promise you, this is not just a list of movie trivia. This is a masterclass in narrative engineering. We're going to explore how changing a visual color palette or erasing a character's sense of humor or forcing an action scene fundamentally alters what a story actually is.
And to really grasp how deep these alterations go, we kind of have to start from the outside in. Before we even examine the psychology of the characters inhabiting this world, we have to understand the physical reality they're standing in.
The actual setting.
Right. We need to look at the literal lens through which the audience is forced to view the story.
The visual language. And if you've seen the very first Twilight movie, the one directed by Catherine Hardwicke back in 2008, you know exactly what we are talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
There is one overwhelming, inescapable visual signature that defines that film. The blue tint.
The infamous, all-consuming blue tint.
It is everywhere. I mean, I remember watching it and feeling like my television was broken. The skin is blue, the trees are blue, the school parking lot looks like it's, submerged in a glacial lake.
Yeah, the whole thing just looks like it was soaked in ice water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, according to the Screen Rant source you shared with us, those extreme blue and gray tones were a very deliberate, highly engineered choice by Hardwicke and her cinematographer.
They absolutely were. Hardwicke had actually utilized a similar, though maybe a little less extreme, cool color palette in her 2003 indie film 13. She really understands how color dictates mood.
She definitely does.
And in the context of Twilight, the blue tint serves a dual purpose. On a literal level, it perfectly matches the dreary, perpetually overcast, rain-soaked atmosphere of Forks, Washington.
Which is crucial, right?
Yes, because Stephenie Meyer chose Forks specifically because it has one of the highest rainfalls in the United States, which provides constant cloud cover for vampires.
Right, they can't exactly be walking around in sunny Malibu.
No, they'd sparkle too much. But on a figurative level, that blue tint mirrors the internal reality of the vampires themselves. Vampires in this lore are physically cold to the touch. They're emotionally distant.
They're literally frozen in time.
Exactly. Static, immortal creatures. So the color palette visually establishes a profound sense of alienation and chill before a single line of dialogue is even spoken. It essentially tells your brain, this world is not warm. This world is not safe.
Okay, I totally get the mood-setting aspect. It's incredibly effective.
Yeah.
But here is where our sources point out something hilarious and honestly kind of brilliant about that blue tint.
Oh, the safety net thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
It didn't just set a mood. It acted as a massive atmospheric shield. it actually masked a lot of the inherent silliness of the premise.
It really did, because when you strip away the moody lighting, what are you actually looking at?
You're looking at a bunch of pale actors in really weird early 2000s fashion posing aggressively in a high school cafeteria.
It's true.
I mean, this Screen Rant article mentions that people on the internet have actually gone in and color-corrected scenes from the first movie to remove the blue tint. They brought the lighting back to normal, everyday levels.
And what does it look like?
Without that icy filter, the movie looks completely absurd. You have these actors intensely staring, hissing at each other, moving in these jerky theatrical ways, and in normal lighting, it just looks like a bizarre high school drama club rehearsal.
That's amazing.
Right. The blue tint grounded all of that ridiculousness in an artistic indie film reality. It's like a visual safety net that makes the bizarre feel profound.
That is such a great way to put it. It forces the audience to take the absurdity seriously. But, the importance of this visual language becomes even more apparent when you look at how drastically it changes.
Oh, in the second movie.
Yeah. If we look at New Moon, directed by Chris Weitz, the visual signature completely flips.
It honestly gives you visual whiplash.
Yeah.
You turn on New Moon and suddenly the ice is gone. The blue tint vanishes, and the entire movie is bathed in these incredibly rich, warm colors.
Lots of orange and deep browns.
Exactly. Golden tones, rich earth greens. It feels like you stepped out of a freezer and into a warm autumn afternoon.
And that wasn't just a new director coming in and saying, I don't like blue. It was a strict narrative necessity. It's a perfect example of how the mechanism drives the aesthetic.
How so?
Well, in New Moon, the focus of the story undergoes a massive shift. Edward and the vampires largely leave the narrative, and Bella's relationship with Jacob Black and the Colot werewolves takes center stage.
And in this universe's lore, the werewolves are the exact opposite of vampires.
Precisely. Vampires are frozen and cold. Werewolves, on the other hand, run incredibly hot. Their baseline body temperature is around 108 degrees Fahrenheit.
They're literally feverish.
Yeah, they radiate heat, they're emotionally volatile, they're deeply connected to the earth and the forest.
Yeah.
So Chris Weitz shifted the entire color palette to visually communicate this transition from vampire ice to werewolf fire.
That's so smart.
Right. Without anyone having to explain it in dialogue, the movie's visual tone is subconsciously telling the audience that the underlying temperature of the story has fundamentally changed.
That is such a subtle but powerful psychological trick. But the visual smoothing out of this world didn't just stop at the color grading. It applied to the literal physical bodies of the characters.
The normalization of the Cullens.
Yeah.
Our sources point out that the movie's heavily normalized the Cullen family. And I want to pause here because when I first read that in the notes, I was kind of confused. Normalized how? Because let's be honest, they are still a group of impossibly beautiful Hollywood actors on screen.
They are conventionally attractive, yes.
Yeah.
But the key word there is conventionally. In Stephenie Meyer's books, the physical differences among the vampires are much more extreme, alien, and just unsettling.
Okay, unpack that for me.
They don't just look like hot teenagers. They look like bizarre, mismatched statues.
Give me an example, because I only really remember the movie versions at this point.
Well, take their physical dimensions. In the text, Emmett and Jasper are described as towering, massive figures. Emmett is repeatedly described as being built like a bear, like an intimidating wall of muscle.
But then you have Alice, who Meyer specifically describes as being incredibly tiny. She's precisely 4 foot 10 inches tall with a strange pixie-like gait.
Oh, wow, 4'10".
Yeah, she's tiny. And Esme, the matriarch of the family, is described as having rounded, softer features, explicitly like a silent movie star from the 1920s. She didn't have the sharp, modern, angular bone structure of a contemporary supermodel. She looks like she was plucked from a completely different era.
So in the books, they look like a patchwork quilt of differently proportioned, strangely featured people.
Exactly. When they walk into a room, the immediate reaction of a normal human isn't just, wow, they're pretty. It's an unsettling feeling. It borders on the uncanny valley.
That something's just slightly off.
Right. It's that feeling of looking at something that is almost human, but the proportions are just wrong enough to trigger a subtle sense of alarm.
I actually remember that feeling from the books now. Bella was always slightly intimidated by their sheer, bizarre physicality. But in the movies, that uncanny valley feeling is totally gone.
It is entirely erased. In the films, they standardize their appearances. Ashley Greene, the actress who plays Alice, is 5'5". She isn't 4'10".
So they smoothed out the height differences.
Yeah, the drastic, almost comical height difference between the towering men and the tiny women is smoothed out. Esme is played by Elizabeth Reeser, who is gorgeous, but she has a very modern, contemporary look.
They don't look like an uncanny patchwork of historical vampires at all. They just look like a very cohesive, uniformly attractive unit. They look like they could all walk down the exact same modern fashion runway.
And to reinforce that idea of a cohesive unit, the movies actually invented a massive physical prop that did not exist in the source material at all.
The Cullen crest.
The Cullen crest.
Okay, this blew my mind when I read the fan wiki source. The Cullen crest is never mentioned in the books. Not once.
Not a single time. Stephenie Meyer never wrote a crest.
I would have bet money it was central to their lore. It's on all the movie merchandise.
I know, but it is entirely an invention of the film's costume and production designers. They created this heraldic symbol. It's a lion, a hand, and a trefoil, and they subtly but forcefully integrated it into every single character's wardrobe.
Like as jewelry.
Yeah. Edward wears it on a leather wrist cuff. Rosalie wears it as a massive, unmistakable pendant necklace. Alice has it on a velvet choker. Carlisle wears it as a ring. Emmett has it on a leather cuff.
Wait, explain the mechanism behind that choice to me. Why would a costume designer go out of their way to invent a family crest and force it onto characters if the author never bothered to create one? What problem were they trying to solve?
It's actually a brilliant solution to a problem of narrative real estate. In a 500-page book, the author has infinite space to explore internal monologue.
Really?
Meyer spends hundreds of pages letting Bella observe how fiercely loyal the Cullens are to each other. Bella muses on their bond, how they protect each other, how they are a chosen family even when they are physically separated by different high school classes or, hunting trips.
So you can literally just read Bella's thoughts about their loyalty.
Exactly. But in a 2-hour movie, you don't have the real estate for hours of internal voiceover. You need a visual shorthand.
Ah, I see.
The crest serves as an immediate subconscious psychological anchor for the audience. It visually screams, these people are a unified tribe. It tells the viewer without a single word of exposition that no matter where these characters are standing in the frame, no matter how chaotic the scene gets, they are bound together by an unbreakable pact.
Okay, I definitely see the utility in that for a filmmaker. But I am going to push back on this a little bit. We've talked about smoothing out their weird physical quirks, ignoring the uncanny valley height differences, and then literally slapping matching branded jewelry on all of them.
Yeah.
Does this cross the line from clever adaptation into just a lazy Hollywood shortcut?
Yeah.
Does it turn them from these deeply unsettling alien creatures into just a highly marketable, highly branded superhero team? Like, they might as well be the X-Men wearing matching leather jackets at this point.
That is the crux of the adaptation debate, honestly. Are you adapting the specific, slightly messy reality of the literal text, or are you adapting the franchise for maximum global marketability?
Which Hollywood is obviously always thinking about.
Right, and Hollywood invariably chooses the latter. They needed the Cullens to look good on a promotional poster at a bus stop in Tokyo, London, and New York. Bizarre height disparities, unsettling historical facial features, and a lack of visual cohesion do not photograph cleanly.
That makes a lot of sense.
A unified, branded, conventionally attractive team sells tickets and merchandise. They traded the unsettling nature of the vampires for approachability.
Which is a perfect segue,
Right.
because just as the supporting cast and the visual world were smoothed out and flattened for mass consumption, our main protagonist underwent a massive flattening of her own.
Oh, definitely.
But changing the main character's personality has far deeper consequences than just, changing a necklace. What happens when you fundamentally alter the psychological makeup of the girl at the center of the story? Let's talk about the character assassination, or maybe the brilliant, calculated adaptation of Bella Swan.
This is perhaps one of the most hotly debated, fiercely contested aspects of the entire Twilight phenomenon. The difference between the Bella on the page and the Bella on the screen is staggering.
Completely. And our YouTube source, a creator named Renee Rule from the channel Ruverse, breaks down this critique perfectly. Let's start by looking at movie Bella, as portrayed by Kristen Stewart. If you ask the general public what they remember about Kristen Stewart's performance, what is the overarching critique?
That she is entirely emotionless, that she is a blank slate.
Exactly. The YouTube creator actually uses the phrase, a prop, in her own movie. And it's hard to argue with that when you rewatch the films. Movie Bella rarely smiles. She rarely panics in the face of absolute terror. She just stares.
Yeah, she's very stoic.
She doesn't seem to have a proactive character arc or a driving motivation until the very end of the saga when she finally becomes a confident vampire. And even then it feels unearned because we never watched her struggle, fail, or try to grow.
The performance, heavily guided by the direction, leans entirely into this stoic, almost catatonic reaction to the supernatural chaos erupting around her. She is incredibly passive. Things happen to movie Bella. She rarely makes things happen.
But Book Bella, I had completely forgotten this until I reviewed the sources, but Book Bella is a mess. And I mean that as a massive compliment to the writing. She is a fully realized, deeply flawed teenager.
She really is.
In the books, Bella is plagued by profound insecurity. She's aimless. But more importantly, the books dive deep into the mechanism of her trauma. We learn extensively about her parents' rough divorce. Her mother, Renee, is erratic, flighty, and basically abandons Bella emotionally to run off with a new, younger husband who plays minor league baseball.
Right. And her father, Charlie, while well-meaning, is emotionally stunted and completely unequipped to communicate with a teenage daughter.
Exactly. So you have a teenager who has been parentified by her mother and then sent away to live with a father who can barely speak to her. This creates a profound, foundational sense of abandonment trauma. She feels fundamentally unloved, unwanted, and like a burden to everyone around her.
Which totally changes the entire context of the romance.
It changes everything. When you understand her trauma, her reaction to Edward makes complete psychological sense. When someone as terrifyingly beautiful, powerful, and wealthy as Edward Cullen suddenly zeroes in on her with absolute unwavering obsession, she doesn't just casually date him.
No, she's all in.
She lashes onto him with an intense, almost suicidal devotion. She is starving for unconditional focus. Her lack of self-preservation isn't just a quirky character trait. It's a symptom of a girl who doesn't value her own life because nobody else ever has.
And beyond the deep psychological trauma, the books flesh out her humanity with highly specific, everyday quirks that the movies completely surgically remove.
Oh, the quirks. The sources highlight so many of these. Did you know Book Bella is a massive fan of the band Linkin Park?
I did not remember that.
Yeah. She listens to their CDs constantly. It's her comfort music. She is also the domestic engine of Charlie's house. She does all the grocery shopping. She cooks all the meals. She cleans. They don't constantly go eat at the local diner like they do in every other scene in the movies. She is actively running a household.
That adds so much grounded reality to her character.
Right. She also constantly bitterly complains about the loud, incredibly slow old Chevy truck Charlie bought her.
And crucially, we have to talk about the clumsiness.
The clumsiness is practically a secondary character in the books. She is spectacularly, dangerously clumsy. She's a threat to herself just walking on a flat, dry sidewalk.
The clumsiness serves a massive narrative function in the text. It dictates a lot of the physical comedy, but more importantly, it gives Edward constant mundane reasons to step in and protect her. It establishes a dynamic where she is physically fragile and he is physically invulnerable long before any evil vampires show up.
But none of that. Not the cooking, not the Linkin Park, not the complaining, and barely any of the clumsiness makes it into the movie in a meaningful way. She just stares blankly.
It's all stripped away.
Now, the YouTube creator pitches a really brilliant hypothetical idea for how the movies could have fixed this passive portrayal. They suggest leaning incredibly hard into Bella's abandonment trauma to make the core conflict, the love triangle, infinitely more compelling.
How so?
Well, imagine the second movie, New Moon. Edward tells Bella he doesn't love her anymore and abandons her in the woods. In the movie, she just kind of goes catatonic and stares out a window for months.
The spinning camera shot.
Exactly. But imagine if the movie framed her subsequent relationship with Jacob Black not just as a slow, sweet rebound, but as a desperate, terrified clinging. Show her actively rushing into a relationship with Jacob, manipulating his feelings, simply because she's petrified of being left alone again.
That's dark, but so interesting.
Show her making selfish, messy choices driven by her trauma. That makes her an active, flawed protagonist driving the plot, rather than just a sad girl waiting in a chair for a boy to come back.
That would certainly create a more complex, active character. But, to understand why the filmmakers didn't do that and why they stripped away the Linkin Park and the cooking, we have to look at a foundational concept in young adult literature.
Which is?
The mechanism of the self-insert character.
Okay, I hear the term self-insert thrown around a lot when people critique YA books, but I want to ask a seemingly dumb question here. Isn't making a character more boring and average a terrible writing strategy? How does making her a blank slate actually help sell millions of books? Explain that mechanism to me.
It's actually a highly calculated, incredibly effective psychological strategy. A self-insert character is intentionally designed to lack highly polarizing or eccentric traits. Look at Book Bella's baseline. Meyer describes her as having average looks, plain brown hair, pale skin.
Nothing stands out.
Right. She's not a prodigy. She's not a brilliant hacker or a martial arts expert or a deeply eccentric artist. She is wonderfully, remarkably average.
So she's just a generic template.
Exactly. Meyer specifically engineered Bella this way so that millions of teenage readers could effortlessly project themselves into her shoes. If Bella was a highly specific, eccentric, brilliant violinist who spoke 3 languages, the average reader couldn't relate to her.
That makes total sense.
By making her a baseline of average insecurity, she becomes an avatar. The reader slips into her skin like a comfortable jacket, and suddenly the reader's the one being romanced by the vampire.
So you're saying the movies understood this psychological trick and just took it one massive step
So
first.
precisely, the filmmakers likely looked at the data and assumed if a somewhat average character allows for good audience projection, a totally blank slate allows for maximum universal mass appeal. If you give Bella a highly specific music taste, like Linkin Park, you immediately alienate anyone in the audience who hates nu metal. By stripping away her specific hobbies, her specific complaints, and her messy trauma, they removed anything that might cause friction with the viewer. They turned her into a pure, frictionless vessel for the audience to inhabit.
A frictionless, hollow vessel. I absolutely see the corporate logic in that, but I have to push back here on behalf of the viewer. Let's pretend the filmmakers have been 100% faithful.
Okay.
Let's say Kristen Stewart is constantly tripping over her own feet in every scene, and she's blasting Crawling by Linkin Park from her truck. Would she actually have been a richer, more beloved character? Or would those highly specific early 2000s traits have aged terribly?
That's a valid point.
Like if I watch a movie today and the heroine's main personality trait is listening to a very specific 2003 rock band, it totally takes me out of the timeless romance of it all. Did the movies accidentally future-proof the franchise by making her blank?
That is a very compelling counterargument. High specificity grounds a character in a precise historical moment. Linkin Park and CD players scream 2005. And when you ground a story too deeply in its era, it can feel dated and alienating to future generations.
Right.
So the blankness does lend a certain timeless quality to the film. However, the immense cost of that future-proofing is a total loss of character agency. A character who just stares and reacts to the plot happening around her isn't driving the story. She is a passenger.
And a romance is a two-way street. If Bella's inner life was muted into a blank stare, the changes made to the other half of this iconic duo were just as drastic. If Bella was flattened, Edward was totally inverted. Let's talk about Edward Cullen, because the Edward on the screen and the Edward on the page feel like they belong in two completely different genres of fiction.
They absolutely do. Pulling from the extensive Reddit threads in our sources, the fan analysis of Edward's characterization is incredibly eye-opening. Let's start with movie Edward, as immortalized by Robert Pattinson. How is he broadly characterized?
He is famously, notoriously brooding. He is depressed, he is incredibly intense, and honestly, he constantly looks like he is in severe physical pain.
He genuinely looks nauseous half the time he is looking at Bella.
Yes. It's like he just smelled something awful.
Uh-huh.
He's practically vibrating with rage and disgust in those early scenes.
Yeah.
But Book Edward? The readers in that Reddit thread describe a character that sounds nothing like Robert Pattinson's performance.
What do they say?
They point out that in the text, Edward is sweet, he is charming, he is playful, and this is the detail that truly shocked me. He giggles. He giggles to himself constantly. He is absolutely delighted by Bella's mind.
He giggles. It is almost impossible to picture Robert Pattinson's iteration of the character giggling.
I cannot picture it all, not even a little bit.
There is a perfect, highly specific example of this disconnect highlighted in the sources. It's the famous clearing scene in the first movie, where Edward finally reveals his superhuman speed to Bella. He grabs her, runs up a mountain, and says, "As if you could outrun me."
It's such an iconic line.
In the book, readers point out that he delivers this line playfully. He is showing off. He is a teenage boy, deeply in love, trying to impress a girl with his ridiculous, superhuman parlor tricks. He's laughing at his own strength. It's a moment of levity.
And in the movie,
Pattinson delivers that exact same line. As if you could outrun me, with genuine, terrifying anger. He is intimidating her. He is furious at his own nature. He plays the scene like a predator cornering its prey. He turns a flirtatious boast into a literal threat.
that is a massive, fundamental shift in the character's core emotional state. And we know from the slash film source that Stephenie Meyer, the author, was actually terrified to see what was happening to her characters. She told Entertainment Weekly that before she saw the first rough cut of the movie, she was incredibly anxious.
Really?
She was worried it was going to be horrible and absolutely break her heart. Now, she ended up loving the final product and felt the core spirit was there, but there was one specific thing she absolutely could not tolerate, and she forced a massive reshoot.
The first kiss.
Yes. She famously forced Catherine Hardwicke in the studio to completely reshoot Edward and Bella's first kiss. In the original cut, the kiss happened outdoors, out by Bella's truck in the driveway, and Meyer watched it and said, absolutely not.
Too fast.
She felt the pacing was way too fast. In the books, their romance moves at an agonizingly slow, glacial pace. Edward is terrified of breaking her, so the crew had to spend money, bring the actors back, and reshoot the entire sequence.
Wow.
They moved it indoors, into Bella's bedroom, which creates a much more intimate, isolated, private setting. And then in post-production, they actually added special effects to artificially slow the footage down. Meyer demanded that the glacial, hesitant, hyper-careful pacing of the book be preserved in that specific moment.
Which is fascinating, isn't it? Meyer fought tooth and nail to protect the physical pacing of the romance, but the actual fundamental personality of her leading man had already been completely transformed by Pattinson's performance.
Totally.
However, as divergent as it is from the text, there is a very strong psychological defense for Pattinson's acting choices.
Okay, defend the nausea. I want to hear the psychological defense for playing a romantic lead like he has food poisoning. Let's hear it.
Think deeply about the psychology of Edward Cullen's existence. Even if it deviates from the book's charming, giggly portrayal, a depressed, furious, disgusted Edward makes complete logical sense.
How so?
This is a creature who fundamentally despises his own vampirism. He vehemently believes, based on his early 20th century upbringing, that his soul is literally damned to hell. He sees himself as an apex predator, a monster, a walking corpse who is desperately, painfully trying not to murder the fragile human girl he loves.
That's a heavy burden.
Right. If you truly believed you were a soulless demon constantly endangering a human life, you wouldn't be playful and giggly. You would be consumed by self-loathing. You would be terrified. The movie amplifies this internal horror over the book's lighter teenage banter. Pattinson wasn't playing the text. He was playing the dark, unspoken subtext of the curse.
Okay, that is a brilliant analysis of his internal state. But I want to unpack this with a real-world analogy, because I think it exposes a flaw in how the movie operates. Imagine you went on a date with a guy. You sit down at a restaurant, and he acts exactly like movie Edward.
Oh, boy.
He stares at you from across the table. He looks disgusted by your presence. He tells you he's dangerous. He refuses to smile. He acts furious when you ask him a basic question about his life. What would you do?
You would leave immediately.
You would run for the hills. You would text your friend under the table to call you with a fake emergency so you could escape. It's terrifying behavior.
Yeah.
But Book Edward doesn't act like that because Book Edward is actually trying to court Bella.
Right. He actually wants her to like him.
He uses charm, humor, and self-deprecation to win her trust and affection. So I have to ask you, does Pattinson's creepy, angry interpretation only work because the audience already knows they're sitting in the theater watching a romance movie? Does the structure of the genre give the actor a free pass to skip the actual hard work of being charming?
That is an incredibly sharp observation. Yes, the structure of the genre provides a massive safety net for the performance. The audience bought a ticket to a romance. The promotional posters tell us they are in love.
Exactly.
The swelling, romantic, orchestral music playing under the scene tells us his anger is actually passion. Because the medium is doing all the romantic heavy lifting, the actor doesn't actually have to perform the mechanics of charm. He can perform the angst and trust the audience to project the romance onto it.
And that reliance on the cinematic medium brings us to a massive realization. When you change the core personalities of your characters, when you flatten Bella into a blank slate and you invert Edward into a furious anti-hero, it inevitably breaks the mechanics of how they interact.
It changes everything.
You cannot put two completely changed puzzle pieces together and expect them to form the same picture. And this forced the filmmakers to completely rewrite how iconic foundational scenes unfolded.
The ripple effects on the plot, the pacing, and the tone are where you really see the medium of film asserting absolute dominance over the medium of literature.
Let's talk about the missing humor. Because when you make Edward furious, you lose the comedy. I want to highlight the famous blood type chapter, which the Swoon article breaks down perfectly. In the book, there's this incredibly long, detailed sequence where Edward skips biology class. Why? because the class is doing blood typing, and obviously a vampire doesn't want to be in a warm room full of teenagers pricking their fingers and bleeding.
A very logical, practical choice for a vampire.
Very practical. But Bella, who is deeply squeamish and hates the sight of blood, gets nauseous. Mike Newton, who is basically the human equivalent of a golden retriever, eagerly offers to walk her to the nurse's office.
Naturally.
But Bella is so dizzy, she practically faints in the snow outside the building. Suddenly, Edward swoops in out of nowhere. He scoops her up, effortlessly carries her the rest of the way, intimidates Mike into leaving, and then uses his charm to completely manipulate the school nurse into letting them both skip the rest of the day.
It's a great scene.
The entire scene is delightful. It's hilarious. It's full of witty, rapid-fire banter. It shows Edward's friendly, protective side, and it highlights Bella's vulnerability in a way that is funny, not tragic.
And in the movies, how is that scene handled?
It is completely cut. It doesn't exist at all.
Which is a shame, because it sacrifices vital relationship development. But it also speaks to the film's rigorous prioritization of tone. That scene is light, it's domestic, it's funny, and the stakes are incredibly low. A girl has a tummy ache. The films were not interested in low stakes. They were aiming for high drama.
Exactly. They hated domesticity. Look at the reveal scene. This is the pivotal moment where Bella finally confronts Edward and tells him she knows he's a vampire. In the book, how does this monumental conversation happen?
Well, they're in the car, right?
They are driving back from a quiet dinner in Port Angeles. They are just sitting in the front seat of his warm car. The heater is on. And Bella, flirtatiously, almost casually, reveals she has figured out his secret. It's incredibly intimate. It's a quiet, nuanced conversation between two people getting to know each other in a confined space.
But in the movie, that scene is entirely relocated and restructured. The director takes it completely out of the domestic space of the car and moves it into a dramatic, gloomy, fog-filled forest.
The total opposite.
The dialogue is no longer flirtatious. It is a tense, aggressive, almost violent confrontation. He's zooming up trees, throwing massive branches, screaming, "Say it out loud!" at her.
It's terrifying. He looks like he's going to kill her.
It is deeply intimidating. And we see this exact same escalation with the famous van crash scene in the school parking lot. In the book, when Tyler's van hits the ice and spins out of control towards Bella, it is described as a gritty, violent, messy event.
Right. People actually get hurt.
Edward has to move so fast and so violently to pull Bella out of the way that he actually slams her to the ground and she gets a bloody head wound from hitting the ice. Tyler is badly injured. Edward braces himself so hard against another car to stop the crushing weight of the van that he leaves massive, deep shoulder dents in the metal. It is chaotic, messy, and highly dangerous.
But the movie version, it is so slick. It is incredibly clean. Bella doesn't get a scratch on her. Edward casually, almost elegantly, stops a multi-ton van with one hand without breaking a sweat, and Tyler just gets a little bump on the head.
It's a very different vibe.
They made it look like an elegant superhero landing in an Avengers movie instead of a violent near-death experience.
And we see it yet again in the third film, Eclipse, with the marriage proposals. In the book, Edward's first proposal happens incredibly quietly in his bedroom while they are just hanging out. It is so casual and domestic that Bella literally thinks he is joking in the movie. It happens outdoors in the expansive woods, immediately following a screaming, high-stakes argument with Jacob Black.
Okay, I want you to explain the mechanism behind this to me. What is the underlying logic here? Why do the filmmakers systematically take every quiet, domestic, intimate moment and inject it with cinematic steroids? Why do they hate bedrooms and cars?
Because of the concept of visual drama. The film medium fundamentally prioritizes visual scale over internal relationship building. A book has the absolute luxury of time. An author can spend 30 pages describing a conversation in a car ride, relying entirely on internal monologue and subtle dialogue to build tension.
Because you can read her thoughts.
Exactly. But a movie needs to give the eye something to look at. A static shot of two people in a car for 10 minutes is visually dead. Notice the pattern. The movies consistently move scenes out of domestic, enclosed spaces like cars, bedrooms, cafeterias, and into visually striking, expansive, moody environments. Foggy forests, snowy mountaintops, dramatic meadows. They are physically elevating the characters into grand environments to artificially heighten the cinematic stakes.
It's like taking a really cozy acoustic love song, played on a single guitar, and deciding you need to adapt it into a massive stadium anthem. You had pyrotechnics, you had a booming bass line, you had a laser light show because you have to reach the back row of a massive arena.
That's a great analogy.
But the intimacy of the acoustic guitar gets totally lost in the noise. So I have to ask, Does the necessity for those blockbuster stakes mean the movies fundamentally failed to capture the intimate domestic romance that made the books a global phenomenon in the first place? If people fell in love with the quiet car rides, did the movie betray the core appeal by turning it into a shouting match in the woods?
It's a calculated trade-off. You lose the quiet intimacy, but you gain massive visual scale. And this relentless need for stadium-level stakes didn't just affect the quiet romantic moments. It completely overhauled the way the story handled its wider lore, its action, and the supernatural world as a whole.
Which brings us to the most drastic alterations of all. Because if you're building a massive summer blockbuster franchise, you can't just have vampires staring at each other in the woods. You need massive threats. You need action.
And the movies were absolutely relentless in pulling those threats forward and forcing action where none existed. Let's look at the werewolf lore, which is deeply analyzed in the Good Novel Source.
The Kalute werewolves.
Right. The books spend a massive amount of narrative real estate deep diving into Quileute mythology. These aren't your standard Hollywood universal monster werewolves. They aren't tied to the cycle of the full moon. They can shift at will. And crucially, Meyer describes them as sleek, elegant, almost majestic creatures.
Not like the classic Wolfman.
No, they aren't the hulking, grotesque, half-man, half-wolf, bipedal monsters you see in standard horror films.
Right, they look like actual beautiful wolves, just the size of horses.
Exactly. And their transformation is tied deeply to Native American mythology, to themes of protecting their ancestral lands and community legacy. It's an internal, spiritual burden.
Now, the movies do actually capture the look of the wolves beautifully with CGI. They are massive but sleek. But they completely rush through the spiritual and community lore because they desperately need to get to the fighting.
They do.
We see this immense urgency to introduce villains from the very beginning of the franchise. In the first book, the evil vampires, James, Victoria, and Laurent, don't even show up until the famous baseball game scene, which is literally 2/3 of the way through the novel.
Which works perfectly in a book because for the first 200 pages, the tension comes entirely from Bella's internal anxiety about dating a vampire. The threat is Edward himself. But in a movie, you cannot wait an hour to introduce an external antagonist. The audience will fall asleep.
Right. So the movie inserts the evil vampires way earlier in the runtime. They even go so far as to invent a completely new character, Waylon Forge, Charlie's friend from the diner, just so they can show the villains hunting and murdering someone.
It establishes the threat early.
They literally show them murder a guy wearing a Kiss Me I'm Irish shirt on a boat.
Right.
Just to establish to the audience that these guys are lethal, the stakes are high, and blood is going to be spilled.
And this relentless demand for visible action completely changes how the storyline of the third book, Eclipse, is handled. In the Eclipse novel, there's a massive army of newborn vampires being violently created in Seattle to attack the Cullens. But because the book is strictly, rigidly told from Bella's limited first-person perspective, the reader only gets secondhand information.
We only hear about it.
Right, we never see Seattle. We only know what Bella is told by Edward or Alice.
But the movie breaks that golden rule of perspective.
It shatters it. The movie breaks away from Bella's perspective entirely to give the audience a God's eye, behind-the-scenes look at the villain, Victoria, executing her master plan. We get to watch her hunting humans, turning them, and building her army in the water. We get to watch the bad guys plotting.
Why? Why break the perspective?
Because of the most fundamental mechanism of screenwriting. Show, don't tell. You cannot have characters sitting in a living room for 30 minutes talking about a massive vampire war happening off-screen in another city. The camera demands a subject. You have to show the army rising from the water to maintain visual momentum.
But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, exemplifies this desperate need for visual spectacle more than the ultimate cinematic change in the final movie, Breaking Dawn Part 2.
The battle.
The fake out. Okay, if you were listening to this and you haven't read the books, it's going to sound wild to you. In the final 700-page book, the Cullen family gathers allies from all over the globe to face off against the Volturi, the ancient vampire royalty who are coming to destroy them.
The tension builds for hundreds of pages.
Yes. They finally meet in a snowy field, the armies face off, and then they talk it out. Through a series of reveals and legalistic loopholes, they have a tense but ultimately peaceful diplomatic resolution, and everyone literally just turns around and goes home.
A 700-page fantasy epic ending in a peaceful diplomatic conversation in the snow.
Exactly. But you cannot end a billion-dollar 5-movie summer blockbuster franchise with a chat. The audiences would literally riot in the streets. The studio executives would have a heart attack. So what does the movie do? It stages a brutal, visually spectacular, violently R-rated, all-out brawl. Heads are ripped off, the earth opens up into a fiery chasm.
It's pure carnage.
Beloved, foundational characters are slaughtered. Carlisle, the gentle patriarch of the family, is brutally decapitated in the first 5 seconds. Leah and Seth, the fan-favorite werewolves, are killed. Fans in the theaters were screaming, sobbing, throwing their snacks.
And then after 20 minutes of pure carnage, the twist.
The vision ends. The camera pulls back. The movie reveals that the entire massacre was just a psychic premonition. Alice Cullen was holding the Volturi leader's hand, showing him what would happen if they chose to fight. She was showing him his own death. So none of it actually happened. The characters are all fine.
It is the ultimate, purest manifestation of adapting an internal, character-driven story for a visual medium. To make room for this massive 20-minute action set piece, the movies had to ruthlessly cut vital lore.
Oh, right.
They completely erased Alice's fascinating tragic history in a mental institution before she was turned. They rushed Edward's dark, vigilante backstory, squeezing it in the night before his wedding instead of letting it breathe earlier in the story. They sacrificed character depth to buy screen time for CGI decapitations.
So I have to ask you, and I want to go back to that magic trick analogy. This fake-out battle, it feels exactly like a magician using massive pyrotechnics, explosives, and loud music, because they fundamentally don't trust the audience to appreciate a really clever, quiet sleight-of-hand card trick. So was the fake-out battle a brilliant, necessary compromise between satisfying moviegoers' demand for bloodlust and technically respecting the book's canon, or was it just a cheap, manipulative, dirty parlor trick?
It was undeniably manipulative. It played with the audience's emotions in a very cruel way, but from a pure filmmaking perspective, it was a stroke of absolute genius.
Really?
Yes. It allowed the studio to have their cake and eat it too. They delivered the massive blockbuster climax that the general audiences demanded, while technically, via a loophole, not breaking the canon that the hardcore book fans worshipped. But it definitively proves that at its core, the movie franchise was serving a completely different master than the books. The books served intimacy, the movie served spectacle.
And that brings us full circle to where we started. Let's recap the journey of this deep dive. We've seen how adapting a story isn't just a French to English translation. It is a total foundational recalculation of a story's DNA.
Absolutely.
We saw how a moody blue tint and a standardized physical appearance turned weird, unsettling alien vampires into a highly branded, digestible superhero team. We saw how a messy, clumsy Linkin Park listening teenager was flattened into a frictionless blank slate, and how a giggling, charming boy was inverted into a brooding, furious anti-hero to fit the cinematic mold.
And the settings, too.
Yeah, we watched cozy bedroom conversations get dragged out into freezing, foggy woods, and we watched quiet, diplomatic resolutions get violently replaced by cinematic decapitations. Every single choice was driven by the medium.
The colors, the lost hobbies, the fake battles, they were all necessary steps in transforming a quirky, intimate domestic vampire romance into a brooding, high-stakes global blockbuster. But it leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over.
What's that?
We've established that the movies essentially bleached the characters of their highly specific personalities and layered the entire world in a serious, high-stakes filter. But imagine a different reality. If the filmmakers had been 100% faithful to Stephenie Meyer's text, if they had kept the goofy, CD-listening, perpetually tripping Bella and the giggling, charming, bright-eyed Edward exactly as they were written on the page, would the films have actually spawned the same rabid, global mega fandom?
Oh, that's a wild thought.
Or was the erasure of their specific, quirky personalities exactly what was required to create the perfect blank canvas? A canvas just blank enough for millions of fans around the world to project their own intense fantasies onto.
It's an amazing question. Did losing what made them unique actually make them universal? It's definitely something to think about the next time you see an adaptation smooth out the rough, specific edges of a book you love. Thank you so much to the listener who provided these incredible sources, and thank you for going on this custom deep dive with us today. Until next time, keep looking beneath the surface.